Our world is in desperate need of new stories. But where do we find them? How can we hear them? In what ways can we learn from them and allow them to shape our world towards something altogether more beautiful?
Perhaps the stories we need have always been here, resiliently present, echoing in the mountains which ground, flowing in the sweet rivers which give life. Maybe they are stories which are found in the land, and we need to explore new ways of knowing and being in order to hear and understand them.
Our world is in desperate need of new stories. Stories of hope, which demands justice in the face of ongoing global systems of oppression. We need new narratives which can help us imagine and dream. Stories towards the uprooting of a dehumanizing world order and the planting of new ways.
Perhaps the stories we are seeking are not new ones, but have been carried by our ancestors from generation to generation. Maybe they exist in the lived experiences and dreams of our grandmothers and sons, all those humans walking in a world not made for them, yet always pursuing better paths for them and their neighbors.
Come to think of it, maybe our world doesn't actually need new stories, or at least that is not where the story should end.
Perhaps what we need is a new world, and stories are part of its making.
Welcome to episode 8 of the Liminal Podcast. Okay.
You know there's a new Spud Day, like Spud 5.
No, I don't.
Yeah,
know.
you know the book Spud.
Yeah, but
I think that's what you...
No, I don't read
about.
Spud. Okay.
No,
okay.
Spud's good. Spud's brilliant, dude.
Okay.
I love those books.
It's not a spodcast. Okay. Welcome to episode 8 of the Liminal Space Podcast. This is Tristan.
And this is a human named Rashid.
Okay, this is a human named Rashid. Hello. So we are currently recording season 2 of our podcast after our 2-month sabbatical, which is great.
Nice break.
What a moment to be alive in the world.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
But a good time to be alive, the questions of our time.
Yeah.
So maybe to start with, we can go back, remind us where we ended season 1. Rashid?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, the main idea that we discussed was the importance and value of stories. And we agreed and concluded that stories are important. They do matter.
Yeah.
And as well, we were like exploring these ideas about how stories are not just fairy tales, which should be limited to escapism and escapist imaginaries, but that they are foundational things which really underlies like everything that exists. We discussed how stories can be things which ground us. They give meaning to our lives and pursuits, and they structure life in many instances as well. Obviously, we particularly focus on stories in Cape Town, which we will continue in this season 2. For example, just suggesting that the city that we live in could be viewed through different narratives. So in Cape Town, which stories are we telling? We were discussing earlier how Cape Town has another new accolade to its list. What's the one now, bro?
We're the best food city in the world, apparently.
Best food city, bro. And who was just here at the moment as well?
So we had Prince William of England. To clarify,
England.
not just the Prince. Prince, what did I say? Prince William of England was here for the Earthshot Prize.
Some vibe like
something like that.
So we again exploring like those ideas of, is that the story of Cape Town that we're telling? This amazing, beautiful place. Or for some of us on the ground here, we realized, for example, a couple of days before Prince William came, is it Prince? King William?
No, he's a prince. Still.
Prince.
Yeah.
Prince William came. There was this thing that happened where by the castle, a whole bunch of humans were displaced and forcibly removed. The government celebrated it as this beautiful cleanup, cleaning up the city, but it did leave, some of us with questions around, those are humans, where are they now? Those kind of things. So then we start looking at, for example, another story of the city about it being one of the most unequal cities in the world.
So I guess we interviewed guests or had conversations with guests that had different lived experiences to explore what the different experiences of Cape Town is. I guess we are coming from a certain paradigm, is important to admit, and probably have some biases about who actually appears on here. So we're not claiming that we're telling all stories? Maybe we'll delve into that. Are all stories equal? That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So that was a key thing, trying to see
Yeah.
how different people experience the city.
Yeah. Like we said, we want to just continue seeking stories, having stories heard, exploring beautiful perspectives of beautiful humans. And as we've said a couple of times, our approach is never to be as experts, and we also don't claim to provide a voice for the voiceless or anything like that, because the reality is, my wife actually reminded me of this a few years ago, no one is voiceless. Everyone has a voice, everyone has a story. It's just that we live in a world where certain stories are privileged, are heard often, sometimes rammed down our throats. Certain lenses, stories and perspectives. We're not really interested in those popular stories. Maybe some would name it as the stories captive by empire, but we are interested in the stories, voices and perspectives that are sometimes under the surface. Sometimes maybe you could describe it as on the margins. And sometimes maybe it's also looking at local stories, what's happening here on the ground.
Yeah, and that's a good lead into where we want to head with this season of episodes, in that if there are certain stories being privileged and others not, then it might matter which stories get foregrounded and what they do. What happens when certain stories get privileged in certain circles. And so this season will focus on the power of storytelling. There's a belief that it is super powerful, but yeah, if we get it right, what can happen if we privilege the right stories? So I have a quote that I stumbled across many years ago now that is a framing for us for the next couple of conversations we'll be having with people. And it explains the power of stories. So I'll read it. It's by David Corton, who is a scholar. And it says, "We humans live by stories that frame our understanding of ourselves, our world, and our human possibilities. Our shared stories create a culture of shared values, understanding, and expectations that is an essential foundation of coherent community life. Because we literally see the world through the lens of our cultural stories, we are strongly inclined to conform to the cultural norms of our tribe or community. For this reason, those who control the prevailing cultural stories control the society." End quote. If there is such a thing that there are those unnamed people or institutions that control cultural stories that result in the control of society, then there could be work to be done in telling other stories. And we are going to try and explore that through the stories of people that we engage with for the next while. And that links to something that we spoke about last time, which was this idea of gaps in reality. The idea of those being that they are representative of this counter narrative we spoke about. They are these stories that are against the status quo and maybe giving us glimpses of a different world or a different possibility.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I liked how you described the status quo in the previous episode, in episode 7. You said things the way they are. And it's, again, part of our previous conversations and hopes and dreams, maybe, about imagining a new world, a better world, We opened this episode up with some words about how perhaps it's not strictly new stories that we need. That's not like the end goal, but the end goal is a new world, a better world, a rehumanizing, just, peaceful world. And sometimes when we are looking towards that better world and wondering how can we be part of its making, as we explored in the previous season, sometimes we need pathways, maybe defining it as liminal spaces and, those processing spaces, but pathways which can help us imagine and look towards something better. And we were speaking about how stories on those pathways can guide us and can lead us towards better things.
What would you say to someone who says that's a bit airy-fairy and like a little bit too make-believe? Like even thinking that maybe stories could change, telling stories could change things.
What I would say to that is that stories already structure pretty much everything that exists. So to argue that no, but stories are just stories and they should just exist in a world of make-believe is a little bit foolish, because like we've kind of been discussing, when you start interrogating things as big as a nation state or a religion, you see, oh gosh, that thing is actually made up of stories. And then you start digging a little bit deeper and you see, okay, these stories, which are often presented as truth or, you know, the ultimate truth or the correct perspective, when we start digging in, we actually see, okay, no, it's not actually, it's actually stories framed and told through certain lenses, a lot of the time biased lenses. And maybe it leads us to the question of whether stories are actually inherently good or whether they can also be used for, I'm just going to say bad, but you know what I mean, for harmful purposes. That's another question that we have. So yeah, I would just argue that stories have already been used to imagine the world the way that it exists. So certainly they can be used to imagine a world otherwise.
I was also interested in your reflection on listening to episode 7. I'm thinking about bringing it back to the personal and how we engage with this as being like, do we really believe the stuff that we're saying? And it's not as simple or clear cut as like, this is what we believe all the time. Like sometimes it does feel like it's a bit airy-fairy as well. So I wondered if you want to share that, like what it felt like re-listening to episode 7 months after we recorded it.
Yeah. So it was actually this morning. I thought, okay, let me be a good steward of the podcast or whatever. And I thought, okay, I'm going to listen to the previous episode that we did, which was obviously a conclusion of season 1. Yeah, and I was listening to it, and there was like about 3 times in the episode where I was listening, and I was like, nah, these guys are they're too fantastical, bro. I was like, nah, that like stuff, and I'm listening to my own words, and I'm like, nah, I don't know about these guys. But then towards the end of the episode, we started talking about that idea of gaps in reality, or glimmers of hope and imagination, and it genuinely like encouraged me, and I was like, yo, that's actually good. I don't know, man, it just actually gave me such hope, and I'm like, no, actually it's helpful and valuable for us to continue these conversations, because I don't think we can just accept the status quo, and there is actually so much beauty in the world. Like there's a lot of beauty and there's a lot of goodness in the world, and like what would life be if we didn't actually pursue that and seek after more beauty and goodness, you know, and peace? We have to, otherwise what are we gonna do? You know.
And it's also a testament to the fact that we ourselves are in this liminal space. I mean, the podcast is called Liminal Podcast, but we ourselves are in this in between. We oscillate between belief and non-belief, and you sit in uncertainty and discomfort, and trying to be as, I don't know, make it as comfortable as possible, trying to have the resilience or whatever you call that thing, the muscle to be able to stay within that uncertainty for as long as we can. I wanted to share that I had one of these glimpses of a gap in reality earlier this week. But to tell that story, I also want to demonstrate the power of these stories that can be controlled by the powerful in society. And so I can't remember which day of the week it was now, but on the news, there was a news analyst who was talking about the state of the economy in South Africa and a whole bunch of analysis, how well we've been doing or not well, whatever, all of that kind of thing. And one of the talking points was around teachers, and the budget allocated to education in the country is super high. It's one of the biggest budget items. And he was making the point about the inefficiency of the education system, or the problems with it. And we all know there's problems with our education system. But when pushed on, like, what is the actual issue? So that's, I think the man is an economist or something. So it's not like from a teaching background or whatever. He's not an expert in that. But his diagnosis of some of the problem was that we have teachers who are, he said, overpaid when compared to teachers elsewhere in the world, relative to the living standard or something. There was some kind of way that he calculated actually our teachers are overpaid, and also that they are teachers were inefficient and lazy, and that he had that kind of narrative, which was being said on a public broadcasting platform.
Yeah.
So for some people, that will be what they believe is the truth because it's coming from a public source. Somehow
course,
I saw it on TV, it must be true, that kind of thinking.
Someone who has powers.
And someone who has power. This is someone who's qualified. Obviously frame him as some kind of expert.
Irrespective if he's ever been in a class to see if a teacher is quote unquote lazy.
Or understanding what it's like to be a teacher, to feed your family and support your family and all that kind of thing with the money that you earn. And at the same time, the part of the problem with framing a story in that way, we know that there's been these stories of budget cuts in the Western Cape where some teachers will lose their jobs next year, for example. And so if you add the idea of like inefficiencies in teachers, or blah, 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 then it makes sense that, okay, maybe we should cut some teachers because there's some fat or whatever.
Of course,
And the reality is that teachers are working incredibly hard in very difficult circumstances. So I've been reflecting over the last couple of days about being also a son of a teacher, a family of teachers. My gran was a teacher as well. And understanding what that world looks like is very different from the picture he portrayed, first of all. But then the gap in reality for me came after I was invited to attend a event led by an NGO called Dinaledi. Shout out to the Dinaledi people, who is an organization of coaches that run leadership development programs for school management teams across Cape Town, really, but this one was focused on the Overberg region. And this was like a graduation ceremony. People had been through a year's worth of leadership development training, and the stories coming from there, or the information that was being shared there, interacting with the teachers, sitting at a table with the teachers, hearing the story that they've been through for the year, the circumstances on the ground in the different schools. These are incredibly difficult contexts that requires a lot of work. And in some ways, when I was sitting there thinking about the job of teachers, the role that they play, they have to deal with all of the social ills of society in a classroom. These kids are coming from, it's all of the stuff, inequality, it's poverty, it's all of the main issues in South Africa are crystallized in the classroom that these people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And if the dominant narrative is, while people are just not doing their job and it's inefficient, I mean, what must you feel like if you are a teacher who's working incredibly hard to make these things work, and you are dealing with problems that is so completely out of your control?
You like a counselor, you like...
Absolutely. Or if you think about a teacher on the Cape Flats who's dealing with gang violence playing out right on the on your doorstep, it's such a different story that that is being told. But for me, the glimpse in reality was like what this coaching program could do for school and what it meant for individual teachers. The kind of personal transformation that was being shared with us was incredible. It was like incredible that can happen. And then you hope again. You think,
and you see, wow, people are doing beautiful things. Actually,
exactly. People are doing beautiful things. The world has the potential to be beautiful. We can make change. And that's on the good days, obviously. And those gaps, they are literally just gaps that allow maybe for us to continue in exploring what this could look like on a more societal level.
I like how you said on a good day. I think like maybe the people who listen to the podcast, shout out listeners, like they usually hear us both on a good day, because the days are when we're talking to awesome, amazing people. And we're like, that's so hopeful. Wow, you guys are planting indigenous gardens in the city. That's amazing, So we encouraged on those days, but there are a lot of days in between, where you actually think, I'm not too sure about that. But some of the things we maybe need in those moments is like community, friends, just to encourage and to be supportive and stuff. Because I think the point is that stories are a communal thing and a collective thing. Imagination as well is actually a communal and a collective thing. What would we think about something like hope? In many contexts that I've been taught about hope is like, as an individual you must have hope. But what if we start thinking about hope as a collective thing, that we should hope, as maybe people in the city or in a nation state? Could we be more hopeful, and could we together work towards creating something better and more beautiful?
That's a good question, and that is what we're trying to do, is ask these questions. We did last season, we spoke a bit about this idea of like our modality is questions. So we're asking questions because it can it could reveal some things, and in the thinking of other people, in our thinking, and sometimes the questions we ask shape in the time when we are doing the recordings. And so this season we'll continue doing that. We base the stuff in questions. We're asking questions, and getting to the solutions is, at some point we must get there, but it feels like it's important that we ask the right questions. That feels like something significant that we've taken out of from season 1, and so we continue that into the season, that we are searching, we are seeking, we are asking questions, we are alive to the questions that are there.
Exactly, asking questions can be so valuable. I think we've discussed in the past that a question opens up new sets of possibilities.
And so this is an invitation to that for the season, to ask better questions, to be alive to this moment, and to come along. We'll see what happens. We don't know how the season unfolds. We'll see. It's a crazy time in the world.
I think the line that you had put on our little notes documents was stories for systems change. And I guess the idea is that we're saying, yes, of course, storytelling is important and valuable and amazing, but we need a new world. We desire a new world, a better world. And it's an interesting thing, because I guess we're not trying to promise too much, because we can't really do that, but at the same time we're saying that we think there's a lot of value in counter narratives, new narratives, and new stories, those kind of things.
And maybe that's the question for the season, is can stories change systems?
Exactly.
We think maybe it can.
Exactly. Rather than having it as a statement, we're gonna speak about how stories can change systems. Can they change systems? Exactly.
And we'll figure out how to explore that with guests.
Hopefully. We'll do our best.
We'll see. How do we change a world? By changing a story, by starting the story, by telling a new story. Stories shift the world. They move us through progress, carry us beyond setbacks. Stories are poems of belief systems. If we can't get our stories straight, villains will be indistinguishable from heroes. Evil may look like good, or even worse, we will be stuck in the binary of heroes and villains. Everyone, one or the other, incapable of being both. Such is the power of a story, that it can motivate us to work together for something larger than us, or prefer radical individualism, with the self at the center of the world. Stories can shift us from complacency to action. They are places of refuge and safety, but at best they are places of courage and vulnerability. They are stories about why the world has to stay the same, and stories about why the world must change. Someone once said, "You can't kill an idea with a bullet." Stories make ideas come alive. They are the carrier medium. An idea can change a life, a community, a world. Shifting a narrative is the work the world needs. This world, hell-bound on imploding under the sheer weight of our existential dread. We need to hear new stories about new worlds so that we can become that. And that doesn't mean more stories of empire or colonizing distant planets. It's not about stories of the year after or make-believe. It is fantastical, hopeful, and not wishful. It is stories about this very earth, your very body. New stories about what becomes possible if we allow our wildest imagination to meet our grounded selves in a collective moment of liberation for all.